Students, we have finished chapter 10th of Aristotle's Poetics, where he talked about the kinds of plots, simple and complex. Today we begin with chapter 11. We have to understand here that discovery, when we say that it is a transition from ignorance to knowledge, it is the recognition of a certain truth of a situation, truth as to identity, and recognition of certain true facts. This tragic effect will be greatest when peripety is simultaneous to discovery. And whenever this discovery is accompanied by the change in fortune, as he has explained it with the help of an example in Oedipus, this change in fortune takes place from the point where the character discovers his true parentage. Now, peripety and anagnosis, discovery, both are essential features of tragedies. And in the present context also, we can understand with the help of the doll's house that we have read, where Nora saves her husband from the results, but suddenly she realizes the truth and she walks away. Chapter 12. In this chapter, Aristotle talks about the parts of tragedy, which must be, he says, treated as elements of the whole, which have already been mentioned. And then he says we have come to the quantitative parts, namely prologue, episode, exod, choric song. Now, these four parts, and the last one is divided into perod, statismon, and komos. He says these divisions were very popular in the Greek practices and Greek theatrical practices, in which the prologue is the entire part of the tragedy between the beginning and the perod of the chorus. The perod is the entrance song of the chorus, where the chorus enters, it is the entrance song. An episode was entire part of the tragedy that comes between two complete choral songs. That is, in between two choral songs, whatever happens is termed as episode. And in modern times, we can obviously relate it with the act of the play because we have acts in the play. Then the exode is the entire part of a tragedy which comes after the last choral song. And this continues to be the end of the play. The statismon is a choric ode or a song, and a komos is a song of lamentation in which the chorus and other actors also join. Chapter 13, Aristotle talks of the kind of plots that a dramatist or a playwright should avoid. Obviously, he has shown his inclination towards complex plot in the earlier chapters, and preceding this opinion, he says that pity and fear are the two emotions which are very important in a tragedy. And the plot should be designed and written in such a way that it should always instigate and produce the element of pity and fear in the audience. And he rejects three types of plots in this chapter, which he finds which are very unsuitable, he says, for the tragic action because they will not be capable or conducive to arouse and produce the element of pity and fear. And he says the plots which can be avoided are those plots which represent a perfectly good man passing from happiness to misery. Because this will rather shock us. Because if a man is very good and he passes suddenly from happiness to misery, it will be rather shocking to us and it will not produce the element of pity and fear. Then second situation is when a bad man passes from adversity to happiness. This also is improbable and we are not convinced because this is totally unsuitable. We know that the man is very bad, but still he was in adverse situation. Suddenly he becomes very prosperous. this also will not result into pity and fear. And then the last is when we see that the story is representing the downfall of a villain from prosperity to misfortune. And although this will satisfy our senses because we know that somebody who is a villain who can downfall, we can accept the downfall of such a person from prosperity to misfortune. But again, this will not arouse the tragic emotions of pity and fear because we obviously know that the man is a bad man, he is a villain. So he is bound to accept and be bound to get justice. This also is not arousing pity and fear because pity is always aroused by some unmerited misfortune or misfortune of men like who are really desirable. Then he says that the change of fortune, whether it should be from bad to good or good to bad, it should come as a result not of vice, but as some kind of a frailty in the character. And this frailty will help us, or this flaw will help us to understand the fact and sympathize with the character and will arouse the element of pity and fear. Then he says there are tragedies which have double threads and opposite catastrophe. And these are considered to be the best because the weakness, the poet is guided whenever he is writing by the wishes of the audience. So such plots, he says, further says that they are more popular and proper to tragedies rather than, to comedy rather than tragedy. Then in chapter 14, he talks about, again, pity and fear, which are aroused by the source. He talks about the source of pity and fear. He says because they may result from the inner structure. And the plot should be constructed in such a way that even without the aid of the eye, even if we are not watching the play, if we are hearing the tale or story, we should be filled with thrill, horror, and melt to pity as the situation takes place. Now, this is the impression we should receive from hearing the story of Oedipus. But when the writer is producing this effect by mere spectacle, he says, it and is dependent upon extraneous aids, those spectacular means which are employed to create that sense of the terrible or monstrous, we must demand that tragedy and every kind of pleasure which is proper to it should be incorporated or included. And then he talks of the circumstances which strike us as terrible or pitiful. First of all, he says actions which are capable must between persons who are either friends or enemies and indifferent to one another. For example, he says if an enemy kills an enemy, there is nothing to excite pity either in the act of intention, except so far as the suffering in itself is pitiful. If an enemy is killing an enemy, it will not arouse pity. The only thing which can arouse pity is the kind of suffering that is being projected and shown. So again, with indifferent persons. But he says when the tragic incident occurs between those who are near or dear to one another. If, for example, brother kills or intends to kill a brother, a son his father, a mother her son, a son his mother, somebody who are very close, if they try to kill each other, it will arouse pity in us. Because this is the kind of framework which has been adopted by the legends. For instance, in Clytemnestra, he was slain by Orteus and Eriphil, and we have to read this example to understand. And then he says that the action which is done consciously and with the knowledge of persons in the manner of older poets, in Euripides, in the play, Euripides makes Medea slay her children. This kind of a deed of horror although it was done in ignorance, and the kind of friendship was discovered later on. It was not known when she was asked to slain. Again, the example of Oedipus of Sophocles. Then there is a third case. He says that when the adult or the person, he certainly acts with knowledge of the persons and then decides not to act. This also causes pity. And these are the possible ways, or the ways which can help us to create the incidents, pity and fear. For he says the deed must either be done or not done, wittingly or unknowingly. These are the examples. I think we will be able to understand this better way if we read a play or the story or the plot of a play and then devise a situation. We have already read Macbeth, and we know that Lady Macbeth is very keen to kill Duncan because she wants Macbeth to be the king of Scotland. And when she goes to kill Duncan, she comes back. She doesn't kill him at once, and she says that I see my father in his face and I cannot kill. And then when he's killed, and Lady Macbeth later on suffers with insomnia and certain hallucinations of blood-ridden hands, and she says that all the perfumes of Arabia I cannot is not able to clean these hands of the thing or the crime that I've committed. We just start sympathizing with Lady Macbeth and we feel pity on her. And then at certain incidents in the play where we feel that life has been very unkind to a certain person because he was a great man, only a certain flaw, just a simple flaw in his character, the flaw of ego, the ambition, jealousy, hatred, etc., has taken him on the road of this destiny or fate. We start feeling fear. God, please help us. This might not happen with us. So these kind of incidents which arouse pity and fear are very important for the tragedy to happen and provide it a kind of a magnitude and spectacle that the audience starts enjoying. And this is later on, these elements when aroused, it leads to catharsis and it leads to purgation, because the moment we cry on somebody's death or we cry in somebody's pain and we start fearing the situation, we are purgated out of all those evil emotions that go inside us. So he says after giving examples, he says, I have already talked about the structure of incidents and the right kind of plot. Now, in the next chapter, he says he'll be talking about the 4 essentials of a character. In respect of character, he says there are 4 things which are to be aimed at. The first thing is that it must be good. Goodness is a requisite of a character. The character must be shown to be good. Now, what he means by good is that the character of the person shows goodness if the purpose or intention shown by him are good, irrespective of class, clan, or status that he belongs. He says that the tragic poet should represent men as better than in real life, and therefore goodness is a very essential feature. Then he says appropriateness. The second element is appropriateness. Propriety. He says the second thing to aim at is propriety. There is a type of manly valor, a valor in a woman. Unscrupulous cleverness is inappropriate. And what he means by appropriate is characters should be true to their types. And he creates this, although it's very difficult to understand, but characters must represent the traditional characteristic or feature of a hero, must be true to the status that he belongs to. And in Greek, obviously in older Greek society, Social and legal status was strictly adhered to. So, manliness would be inappropriate, he says, in a woman, and dignity and nobility in a slave. So, it should be appropriate. Thirdly, he says character must be true to life. And what does he mean by true to life is that we feel pity and fear for the character. So, those special emotions, tragic emotions, will only be aroused for the man with whom we can identify. That is, character must be true to life, for this is a distinct thing from goodness and propriety as here described. So, we will identify ourselves with the man. We will be afraid. God forbid us. We will not be, God save us from not putting us into the same situation. So, this kind of an imitation of the character, action of the character, as he acts, as he speaks, or the circumstances that he is into, asks us or forces us to identify the audiences with the character. This is what he means by true or true to life and reality. The fourth, he says, is consistency. The fourth is consistency. The subject of imitation, he says, who suggested should be consistent, and he must be consistently inconsistent. This is very essential because he says that consistently consistent means the kind of character who is represented in a consistent manner throughout a single drama. If he is trying to represent something inconsistent in his behavior, say for example impulsiveness or rashness, he should represent him in a very consistent manner. That is, throughout he has to be rash, he has to be impulsive throughout the play. So this is about the behavior of a character, about the natural behavior of a character, which are governed by certain laws of probability and necessity, which Aristotle talks of in this particular chapter. Now, chapter 11 to chapter 15, we have talked about peripety and reversal. We have talked about anagnosis or discovery. We have to make notes of these terms because these are the terms which are usually asked in your examinations for short notes. You can be asked to write a short note on peripety, on anagnosis, on character, on plot, etc. Aristotle has also talked about the quantitative parts of tragedy, prologue, episode, exod, and coryxon. He also talks about the plots which are to be avoided. Then he talks about the essential elements or the qualities of an ideal hero. Then certain tragic situations which I would suggest that you should read more and more examples from Greek plays, from English plays, which will give you an idea how certain situations can arouse the element of pity and fear among the readers and audiences. Then he also, in the last chapter, he talks about the essential characteristics of a character, which are the four features: goodness, appropriateness, propriety, what he says, reality, true to life, and consistency. These are the important points that he has talked of in these chapters, starting from 11 to 15. In our next session, we will start from chapter 16. Thank you.